Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Grace Stead. I'm with Fair Trade Tourism, and we've been working together with the Roundtable Human Rights in Tourism for the last two and a half years, working on different research and having various workshops and various webinars. And this is actually the final webinar that will bring to close the work that we've been doing together with the Roundtable for Human Rights in Tourism. So we're really pleased to be here. And I also just want to say thanks to SATSA, who's also helped with marketing this event as well, and also Africa's Eden. So we've got various participants from across South Africa. We've also got participants from Germany and from other countries as well, also other African countries as well. So it's really lovely seeing such a large group of people that are participating here. Okay. If we can go to the next slide, there we go. Just a few housekeeping rules for today. Maybe just to start off with the documentation to confirm that the webinar is being recorded and we might want to publish it afterwards. So just that you are aware of that. Then also, if we can ask you all to please remain muted during the event. We're happy to see you. Feel free to switch on your cameras, and please, on the side of communication, use the chat function on the side. If you're not sure, you'll see it right at the bottom, like speech bubble, says chat. There we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions that you've got throughout the presentation. We're going to queue those questions, and then we will try and answer as many of those questions as possible. You're also welcome to stay anonymous with your questions if you like, and you can either ask it in the open chat, or you can specifically send a message to the hosts. We just request that you please stay on topic, be polite and respectful at all times. Okay. Then we're going to kick off our agenda that we've got today. I'm just doing the welcome and introduction. Then Katrina Stechel will be doing the setting the scene for us. After that, I'm going to be having a discussion with Advocate Louis Null, Louis the lawyer, as is commonly known. And then we're going to ask Cheryl Blackburn from Three Tree Hills to just give a little bit of her own local perspective and her experience that she's got, that they've got a lodge in the Drakensberg area. And then lastly, we're going to try and pull it all together, see what questions there are, and see what do we take away from this and how do we take this forward. Okay, so next up is Katarina. She's a dedicated expert in business and in human rights, with an academic background in tourism management and professional experience in development cooperation and communication across various countries. She's working as a program manager at the Roundtable for Human Rights in Tourism for over 5 years. She has initiated, implemented, and led numerous pilot projects, guidelines, training initiative, tools, and events. So she's going to be setting the scene for us. So over to you, Katrina. Thank you so much.
Very much, Grace. And thank you to everybody who took the time to be here with us today. It's such a pleasure to see so many familiar and also unfamiliar faces. Happy to have you here and happy that you dedicated your time for this very important topic. We heard it a little bit also in the introduction and what you've seen for the webinar. Fair working conditions in tourism do not begin in the vehicle, in the lodge. They start at the planning stage. So for us, it was very important to see how fair contracting just transition, how that works on a day-to-day level. And that's why we came here today. And this whole webinar is actually a measurement that we took from a project that we had last year in South Africa. I'm going into more detail with that, but before we do so, Roundtable Human Rights in Tourism, for those of you who don't know us, we are based in Berlin, in Germany, and the Roundtable is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was founded in 2012. actually as a result of the so-called UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And at that time, a few tour operators within Germany, they sat together and said, what does that actually mean for tourism? And as of today, we are the largest sector dialogue platform for human rights and tourism. We are a nonprofit association with currently 41 members from 8 countries and 5 interest groups. So you see tour operators, associations, multipliers, such as institutions, university, foundations, also ITB Berlin, for example, other civil society members and certifiers. Our membership is open to all tourism companies and other stakeholders who commit themselves to the roundtable principles. And yeah, for any stakeholder that is actually interested in promoting sustainable tourism and human rights in tourism, they can become a member. And for us, we really see ourselves, as a fruitful exchange network of knowledge, of expertise, and an open dialogue platform, as I said before, for the exchange of know-how, also of mutual learning within the industry. And we provide a lot of information, guiding materials, examples of good practice, and so on. So here you see a little bit of our key goals as an organization. We are a global platform that is uniting tourism stakeholders to really address human rights challenges. Within that, we want to spark innovation and we want to amplify voices, particularly on the ground. So that's within the destinations. We also co-develop a lot of impactful projects with diverse partners, sharing tools, training, and expert knowledge. And with all of that, it is very important for us that we stay independent. We want to stay collaborative and deeply connected across sectors. Let's talk a little bit about the project that we did within South Africa. First of all, we are very aware that the topic of human rights can be quite sensitive. And for the project that we had, that actually shaped our entire approach. We deliberately avoided any top-down mindset. This was purely about collaboration and not imposition. We did not came with a ready-made answer, and we aimed to work with stakeholders, not over them. So it was equally important. We did not want to be patronizing. Our role was always to carefully listen and to understand perspectives on the ground, not to dedicate any solution from the outside. So with that human rights impact assessment that we did in South Africa, we also made a point of recognizing the strong commitment that South Africa already has for human rights. And this commitment is firmly embedded in the constitution and also supported by extensive legislation. So we approached the context with respect for the existing legal and institutional framework. The project in South Africa followed a clear multi-stakeholder approach. You see here the participating parties and has actually received broad support from the industry, not only from roundtable members, but also from other European tour operators who consider this approach highly important. And South Africa is a highly relevant destination for European travelers. So at this point, I would also again sincerely thank all the supporters and especially our dedicated partners in South Africa who were very open to the discussion and the consultations throughout the process. And the project was also set against the background of the German Supply Chain Act, which we might hear about later, and also the growing legal and ethical responsibilities within tourism. The starting point was an abstract risk analysis that was conducted by core members as part of their due diligence under the Act. And our partners contributed with, for example, their supply chain data, with research, with own risk assessments, with network and perspectives, and of course, financial support. The assessment focused on a clear and typical tour operator's value chain for a group tour in South Africa. It was not a sector-wide impact assessment that was given due to the time that we had, and of course also due to the enormous size and cultural variety of South Africa. So it represents a snapshot of the situation on time and of the on-site visit. It was conducted from 19th to 29th January of 2025, and the scope is intentionally limited, as I said. We focused on the analysis of actual and potential human rights risks that are related within the tourism value chain. So given the available capacities, that was important for us to set the scene, as I just mentioned. And here on the screen, you see a little bit of where the assessment actually took place. So the assessment covered Cape Town, Joburg, and the Greater Kruger area, focusing on middle-range group tourism along a specific tour route. It was aligned with international human rights impact assessment standards and also with the German Supply Chain Act, with a very practical focus on tourism product-related risks. We talk a little bit later about the key topics that we're identified. But for you to see that we, in the limited time that we had, also with the great support of all the people who participated within the assessment, we talked to a ton of stakeholders. So over 80 stakeholders in total were consulted within this assessment. And we are very, very grateful for the opportunity that we had, because that meant that we not only spoke to high-level managers, but also for people who are a little bit further down the supply chain. So we talked to front staff in hotels, we talked to drivers, to really cover also what is called often the forgotten majority of the tourism supply chain. So all the people that you might not think of first as tourism stakeholders, but who are very, very crucial within the process. And here on the slide, you just see a few impressions from our on-site visits. A tourism impact assessment is not only a compliance tool, I want to make that very clear. It is a very strategic investment in the sustainability and also the resilience of your company and partnerships in South Africa. So I just go through the process and the benefits for just 1 minute, but it really helps companies to detect risks such as excessive working hours, youth employment, discrimination, or unsafe labor practices before they escalate and might turn, for example, into reputational or legal issues. And by mapping the risks across the tourism value chain, companies can actually focus the resources on where they matter the most. As mentioned before, South Africa already has a very strong labor and equality laws. So, for example, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act or the Labor Relations Act, or also the Employment Equity Act. And at the same time, international tour operators are now subject to, for example, the German Supply Chain Act and legislation on European level that is hopefully about to come. So an impact assessment actually bridges these frameworks by translating all of these legal obligations into practical and very context-specific actions. The process also fosters a direct dialogue between tour operators, between DMCs, between local suppliers and communities. And this can build very trust-based and long-term partnerships that are actually improving transparency and also cooperation throughout the whole supply chain. And throughout such an assessment, companies receive real-world data and stakeholders and feedback from the field. And that is something that is very rarely available through standard audits. So this can lead to very actionable recommendations, to policy updates, and improved staff training, for example, on key issues. And participating companies can demonstrate leadership in such an important topic as human rights and sustainability. And that might also, or you have an increasing demand on this by customers, by partners, and also by regulators. So it has a lot of benefits and is something that is quite difficult to achieve for a single tour operator. But this is also why projects such as this one with a multi-stakeholder approach are so important. Just very briefly touching on the initial findings, we already had two events on this, so I'm not going into more detail, but here on the slide, you see the key findings of the consultations that we had on site. So they show risks and leverage points that were identified. And we have all of that reflected in a report. My colleague is going to post the link also in the chat. You see it also here on the slide. So if you're interested in this whole concept, we have also had a more detailed webinar with SATSA and FTT specifically on the assessment. Then I kindly invite you to dive deeper into the whole topic. And for now, you see the learnings that we also have on the slide, but I don't want to take up any more time of your time. That was a little bit more the theoretical framework of this whole assessment. And I am very, very happy to have Louis here. And with that, I give back to Grace. Happy to receive any questions that you might have on our assessment via the chat.
Thank you so much for your input, Katarina. You'll see in the chat, the project report link has been added there, so please feel free to also have a look at that. That it's all online and it's available. So yeah, please look at that. Katrina, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we're now looking at how do we actually shift this deal, what actually happens in a practical way on the ground. And we're very fortunate to have Advocate Louis Nell with us today. He's known as Louis the Lawyer. He's an advocate and attorney widely recognized for translating complex legal regulatory issues into practical guidance for tourism businesses. He founded his consultancy in 1970 already. 1979, sorry, I made it a little bit too much there, but he's worked extensively for tour operators, travel consortia, industrial bodies, and logistical firms. He's a regular speaker, writer, media contributor, and he speaks on various issues ranging from contracting and compliance to consumer protection and responsible tourism. So Louis, thank you so much for joining us today. Can we just check there that you are online there? Can I just hear you? Can you find your mute button?
Mute, okay. Now, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Hallelujah, okay.
Okay, so Louis and I are going to have a little bit of a chat because as regulatory expectations increase globally around sustainability, in the South African tourism business industry, we are also navigating real world trade-offs every day. And what do we actually do about that? Things from energy transition, staff well-being, community impact. These are often pursued with very, very tight margins and rigid contracting frameworks. So understanding how these decisions land on the ground is essential to what we're actually needing to look at supply chain. Is it fair? Is it viable? Is it built to last? So one of the things where it starts off is the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act in Germany that's aimed at all the large companies, but it also has a knock onto the smaller hotels and the smaller tour operators. So while very few companies are actually directly obliged under the Supply Chain Act to implement, there are a lot of implications that are actually happens through all of this. So with that background, Louis, what would you say are the principles of contractual agreements in the tourism industry? What is important for the tourism industry to take into consideration with regards to supply chain?
Thanks for the question, Grace. Look, I know we're focusing on the aspects of the German Act with regards human practices and the environment. But in essence, to give you a snapshot from a legal perspective, is that very important for the parties to be able to assess the risk profile of the tour that the party is being booked for, in a nutshell. So they're coming via one of the bigger guys, who in turn goes to some of the smaller guys, maybe doing kite surfing, river rafting, etc. And the whole spectrum of the tour that's being booked must be assessed jointly by all the parties involved.
If we're actually looking at that from a practical point of view, what are the South African businesses doing? Quite often Germans think, well, it's Africa, nothing happens there. But I believe that in South Africa, we're already doing quite a lot. So do you maybe have some examples of things that are actually happening right here in South Africa? What works for our benefit there?
I must just clarify one thing for the audience. Like the GDPR, you may recall that that's the German act pertaining to our privacy, POPI, which came into being in 2011. And at the time, the big issue was whether South African travel agents, tour operators, destinations, and so on had to comply with the GDPR. And there was a limited issue about indemnities, and it turned out that the indemnities of the GDPR applies only to the Privacy Act, and it didn't extend to the passenger traveling to South Africa. And there's a like issue involved here, which I'd like to investigate later, and I'll report back to you and the team. But the extent to which any person traveling to South Africa can rely on compliance by the bigger players in the industry, and the smaller operators with small guest houses and so on have to comply with the German Act, which, as per the notes I received yesterday, is limited to entities with 1,000 or more employees. But that entity in turn has to look for compliance by the smaller players, suppliers they refer to, in the industry, to the extent to which they actually, by extension of the act via the party to who it does apply, has checked with the various suppliers, i.e. what practice do they have in terms of the staff, in terms of the environment, and so on.
So would this be the reason why so many of our people on the ground, the lodges and the tour operators are saying that they're getting all these requests from Europe that they need to fill in these forms, and they need to supply additional information and that? So would that be the knock-on effect that we're starting to feel here in South Africa?
Off the cuff, I have to see the questions that's being asked, but I think in principle the answer is yes. The guidance that have to be given by, or has to be given by, the bigger operator, looking at the suppliers involved and then giving them guidance in terms of be it training, be it investigating their risk, and so on.
Okay, so interesting also there that you've touched on training, because a question in my mind is, if we are getting a lot of requests from the European Union that they've got legislations that we need to comply with, what is their responsibility also with helping to upscale what is happening in South Africa for our local people also to be able to be ready to be able to comply with their requirements, and additional training and things like that? Is there also obligation on their side to support the people on the ground in South Africa?
At this point, Alice, I haven't looked at the act per se, but I think there's a moral obligation to extend the German legislation into our tourism environment, regardless of the size of the operator they're dealing with, whether it's a small B&B on the outskirts of the Kruger, vis-a-vis some of the bigger outfits in the Kruger, and then some of the operators who do flights and road transfers and so on. I think the whole idea of the German act, which will eventually, I think, filter through, and it's a very commendable scenario of assisting and making sure that the suppliers they're dealing with, i.e. the German operators, fall in line with the German requirements, which there's a lot to be done, including what I alluded to earlier, the training, but there's also policy statements and what have you, that the bigger players are required to guide the smaller players as to what the content should be and what documents they should require.
Okay. So, I mean, you've been working in the tourism industry, and I know you're very passionate about sustainability. Um, if we look at the South African scenario, what, from a contracts perspective, what actually helps to support or maybe constrain fair labor and transition efforts? What are the things that we're actually doing right, or we can use contracts more proactively, or things that we must maybe relook at and potentially see how we can actually change that. I'm just thinking of, trade-offs, long-term benefits for businesses, the impact on the staff, things like that. So how does the contracting actually come into play to actually support fair trade tourism? Well, not fair trade tourism specifically, but the concept of fairer tourism, responsible tourism, and sustainability over the long term with a positive impact on the people.
Well, as you know, I've done quite a bit of work over the years with fair trade and tourism, and I think it could be, and it's coming from me personally, is it could be a very useful vehicle to import and accelerate and support the concepts that we'll be talking about. And the smaller guys need to be guided by the bigger guys. And it'd be very nice to see policies being generated that build into their operational requirements the various aspects of the German legislation.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that input. And if we look at things such as pricing structures, payment terms, volume seasonability, I mean, one of the crises we've got in South Africa, not crisis, but it's a definite focus, is the fact that so many tourists want to come to Cape Town and to the Kruger. I mean, 80% of our tourists are going to Cape Town and the Kruger, and the rest of the country needs to deal with the other 20% who might venture a little bit further. But how do we actually use contracting to potentially also help shift some of that? How do we use contracting to potentially look at better pricing structures, better payment terms, things like that, to actually help with the overall sustainability of the tourism industry? Is that something that can be done?
That's an interesting observation. We've had this discussion often, and people like Hundley from SAST who's been to New Zealand have a look at things there from a risk management point of view. But also, the perennial question is, we've got as much, if not more, to offer than New Zealand, and why we're not winning the race. But the bottom line is that we need to make sure, in terms of contract negotiation and risk management, that all the parties involved, for example, in a particular trip, are on the same page. So that's going a little bit beyond the aims of what we're discussing, i.e. human resources and the environment. But you can easily build into your negotiations the various aspects that is mentioned in the German Act pertaining to, as I mentioned earlier, training, risk analysis, and so on. And I think it'll be a very positive contribution to tourism if the bigger players in South Africa can take the bull by the horns and act as if they were the 1,000+ employee companies who have to be obliged to comply with the German legislation and pass on the various requirements that have been to be met by the smaller guys, who often don't have the deep pockets to comply, because it does have financial implications. But that act, the German Act, actually addresses the issue of financial contribution and support from the bigger players. So we can replicate that.
Okay, so it's very much also just about seeing, it's almost about, well, taking that responsibility that even if you are not legally required to do that, what is the moral responsibility? What is the right thing to do? And to be able to see how that actually becomes standard practice in the business that we're doing. Is that what we're looking at?
That's why I mentioned your company, and that can be an exercise that can be, I believe, fruitfully implemented by having a look at the requirements of the German Act, and regardless of whether or not it applies in this country, take a feather out of their hat and try and bring those aspects, and there are many of them, into a goodwill exercise, and then farm that out to the various tourism operators, regardless of what they're doing and what size they are and where they are in the country. And I think that'll be a good sales tool that the SA Tourism can use as a way to raise the profile of the South African operators, regardless of size.
Okay. If we look at it also from the German perspective, how what do they also need to see from the South African suppliers? So, what do you think the South African suppliers actually need to do to be able to be transparent and be able to provide the information to actually be able to support the German side of things? So I know you're speaking from the South African perspective. I know this is not about the German legislation per se, but it is about how do the South Africans actually, looking at from the German side, what do we need to do on our side to actually up the game?
Yeah, as I suggested, I think we must take ownership of the guidelines that is encapsulated in the German legislation, where you've got the two tiers, as I say, the big player who has to comply and the smaller player who doesn't have to comply, but can be guided by the bigger player who has to comply. And I think if we do that, vis-a-vis German tourists, it'll be a big plus for them to know that we're actually doing our best to comply, regardless of the levels of requirement. And then to, as I said, turn that into a marketing opportunity, not only to German visitors, but to international visitors, which a lot of these guidelines that are contained in the German Act, I think, are useful and are not just a big whip. I think there's a big carrot involved as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we look at it from a just transition perspective, now in South Africa, just transition is it's a whole big monster in itself. But the various things where we're actually trying to shift the deal, trying to make sure it is more equitable, although we are still a country with so much inequalities. But how do we actually also seek, is there a way that we can use the legal side of things to also help to underpin, to actually make that difference towards more better energy transition, better human rights as well, and things like that? Anything else that you feel that we can do to specifically support just transition in South Africa?
Look, I think the primary thing we can do, and that relates specifically to the legal aspect per se, is that contracts must be negotiated on an arm's length perspective. And vis-a-vis the bigger guy and the smaller guy in the South African context, not a us and them scenario, where the smaller guys often are desperate and the bigger guys don't have that some kind of financial contextual pressure, and they can work together for a common goal, wherever the supplier is, because there could be a number of suppliers. Somebody comes out on a trip, they can have a number of experiences involving a number of suppliers. But if you can engage all those players on a contractual level and then work these fantastic matters addressed by the German legislation into the contractual relationship, I think is a big plus going forward.
Any tips for the small guys on what to do? I mean, yes, a small travel agent, whatever, they wanting to actually also engage for a better deal, but quite often you sign on the bottom line, you can't change the contract. Do you have any advice?
Yeah. Yeah, that of course is tough sometimes, and but I think what is achievable, and the presenters, everybody involved in today, we can put together, if you like, a series of articles highlighting the key components of the German Act, which, as I say, there's an obligation on the bigger players to involve the smaller suppliers vis-a-vis compliance in a very subtle manner. But I think we can take the compliance elements and write them into a series of articles so that the smaller suppliers can take ownership of that compliance. And again, as I've mentioned a few times, use that as a marketing tool vis-a-vis German and other visitors.
Okay, so I think definitely that's something that I'd like to just pick up with you afterwards as well. We are planning to have some follow-up workshops on this in partnership with SATSA and Africa's Eden as well, where we're going to be looking at this a bit more. So anybody who is interested is welcome to join for that as well. And yeah, we'll keep this discussion going with Louis around this. Any last words from your side, Louis, on what you think? Anything else that you're feeling you would like to still say?
I'm very glad to hear about your proposal, and I think if we encapsulate those requirements and it comes from the industry as opposed to legislative pressure, it can be fantastic mileage and a fantastic introduction into how to, for the smaller guys, to address the issue of human resources extension and then the environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Louis. I really appreciate
Pleasure.
it.
Pleasure.
I just want to see, are there any questions from the audience? You're welcome to drop them into the chat. I think at this stage, what I'm going to do is say thanks to Louis. Louis, you can mute yourself on your side again, and then I'm going to actually invite Cheryl to come on and to actually share her screen and tell us a bit about what she's doing on the ground. Cheryl, are you ready to share from your side? Just while she's busy setting up on that side, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Cheryl. She's a hospitality entrepreneur and a sustainability advocate with hands-on experience in integrating human rights, environmental stewardship, and community development into business operations. As the driving force behind Three Tree Hill Lodge in KwaZulu-Natal, at the Drakensberg, absolutely beautiful. She has pioneered responsible tourism initiatives that support local communities, promote ethical practices, and reduce environmental impact. So on that note, Cheryl, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Three Tree Hill. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Grace. And thank you everyone for joining today. I think this is such an important topic for all the stakeholders that are here today to really collaborate. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what this is about. You know, it's although it's in black and white, it is about collaborating and molding and working together, because fairer models are not abstract ideals in South Africa. They are already being practiced, they're being negotiated, and they're being improved on in real businesses under real constraints. And South African law forces integration already, as Katrina and Louis have mentioned earlier. So labor, energy, the community, and environment cannot be separated. They are all part of our tourism industry. And in our particular business, fairness is not a corporate social responsibility add-on. For us, it's a business survival and resilience strategy. We believe that day-to-day fair supply chain choices actually shape our staff stability, our service quality, supplier trust, and our long-term sustainability. So who are we actually? Grace gave a short little introduction. We are a rural hospitality business in the foothills of the Drakensberg of KwaZulu-Natal. We offer the most beautiful accommodation, all freshly homemade meals in a really tranquil setting. We also offer exhilarating activities that focus on the history in the area, the culture, and the nature. We're 4-star graded, we're fair trade certified, we're very exclusive and small. We only have 9 rooms. We are tourism dependent. Oh, it sounds like such a dream, doesn't it? But really, to be honest, it's not an easy industry. And there are really thin margins in tourism, and especially a remote lodge like ours. We have high infrastructure costs. We need to build our own roads. We need to make our own trails. We need to find our own water, generate our own electricity, deal with our own waste. So there are a number of costs involved in this type of operation that may not necessarily be the same as a city hotel. We've got seasonal demand, so we have pressure with marketing. How do we actually get people here and try and get them here throughout the whole year? Because we're employing staff who need to feed their families the whole year round. So we need to look at clever economic systems in ways of pricing. How are we pricing ourselves to be able to attract more customers in the lower season to ensure that the contracts that we've provided to our staff can continually be supported. So that's why 15 years ago we decided to join Fair Trade Tourism. We needed support and we needed a framework for collective learning. And I must say that's really, it's been fantastic to have like-minded properties, activities, other tourism industry stakeholders to be able to collaborate with them and ourselves, and the relationships that are formed between ourselves, the suppliers, and each other has really helped with this journey and the integrated approach to business practice. And we haven't got a long time. I've only got 5 minutes left. So just the three things that I'll focus on is really human resources, the community impact, and the environmental sustainability. And as I spoke just briefly, the economic is also super important. So we do need to make sure that we have a sustainable business to be able to deal with all of those other issues. So
Thank
just
you,
on,
Carol. No rush.
okay. Thanks, Grace. So just on HR and sort of a little bit to tie in what Louis was talking about earlier, one of the things that, for example, that would come into play in our business would be transparent contracts that are aligned with the South African labor law. So we already do have a good basic conditions of employment act, but it does come with a lot of legalese, and most of our rural staff really don't understand a single word in there. So we've done training workshops with all the staff together with the translator, and then also sat one-on-one and developed this little infographic, and it goes through the whole basic conditions of employment act, just how to break it down and make it understandable, because in Germany, there can be a very complicated legal document, but on the ground in South Africa, we need to make it relatable to the people that are here. So we are hearing that and using that guidance and then adapting it on the ground to our particular situation. So this is one of the things on the human resources side. The other thing that is super important for us in human resources is training and how we do our training. So again, being in a rural environment like ours, we don't have a large pool of skilled hospitality people that we can draw from to employ at the lodge. So a lot of our staff are unskilled, and we need to do a lot of training. And the training doesn't only focus on departmental skills development, like this, for instance. This is taking our chefs to our local cheese supplier and actually going through the whole process, engaging with them to gain a deeper understanding of why we've chosen a local product and how this cheese is actually made, right from the cow through onto the table. And this creates it creates team building, and it gives the staff really a sense of achievement and skills development and knowledge base that they have not had before. But so what I was saying earlier, it's not only the departmental training that we do household budgeting training. So on a personal level, most of our staff are women. So for each of them to know how to gain an understanding of how to set a budget for their own home. So it's personal development, human resources training. That's also what we believe in. We're a small lodge, as I've said a number of times. We've only got 9 rooms. We can only afford to employ 20 staff from the local village. So there are a lot of other people that need to gain some sort of economic benefit from our lodge. And just donating money into the community is also not a very practical or long-term solution. So we've started a small business incubator for particularly women, but it could be anyone in the village that has some sort of skill or craft. We have, in this particular instance, this is Maduna. She's the woman in the middle. She actually has a teacher training degree, but wasn't able to get a job teaching. So she did a tourism apprenticeship with us. We couldn't afford to employ her on a long-term basis. So we trained her in how to make these beautiful placemats. Now she has her own super successful business selling these beautiful underplates in our shop to our guests. So that's just a little way of throwing the net a little wider. That it's not only employment economic benefits and local procurement economic benefits, but also doing things in the community that could spread the net a little wider. Then on an environmental level, I'm just going to let this little video play in the background. But for us, the environmental sustainability is not a cost expensive thing. For us, it was actually a cost control thing. So waste reduction, water efficiency, energy reduction. This is a solar cooker that the chefs use to cook our lentil curry outside. We've got sun 360 days of the year here. So this was a no-brainer for us to start with investing in this small thing, the Wonder Bag. That's also conserving energy. And eventually, after 15 years, we are now totally off the grid, and we do have solar panels. And batteries, and that was also not an easy thing from an economic point of view to be able to invest in. So we did get help from the Green Tourism Incentive Program, and finally have managed to do that again, as I said, through collaboration. That, you know, none of this needs to be a totally on your own thing. It's not simple, and not straightforward. It can be messy, and it needs to be negotiated, and it's imperfect. You know, there's nothing that's cast in stone, because every business is different. So it definitely requires transparency between your suppliers and your staff and your guests. Trust between your suppliers, your staff, and your guests. And it does take a lot of patience. So we are constantly revising, we're constantly updating, and we're constantly evolving. So, our great plans 20 years ago are not necessarily exactly what they are today. But as I said, it is all about evolution. But we've definitely gained a stronger loyalty from our staff and suppliers by going on this journey. We've got lower recruitment and training costs. Greater operational flexibility during crises, for example, COVID, which the dreaded C word. A reputation that attracts aligned guests, and that's very important for us as well. Not everyone would be on the same boat as us as far as guests are concerned. And our staff have become problem solvers, not just employees. So just to wrap up, really, I think that fair models build businesses that can last and not just survive the next season. Thank you.
Cheryl, thank you so much for sharing what you guys are doing there in the Drakensberg. Beautiful always to see, and I mean you do a spectacular job. So thank you so much for taking time to share that as well. I just want to see if there are any questions. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions that you might have. I see. Well done, Cheryl. Excellent work. Incredible work done, Cheryl. So wonderful to be reminded about this again. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes we all need reminding about what's actually happening on the ground. Can I see if there are any other questions, any other follow-up? I think there is an anonymous question that came in. Is the logic flow of the German law as follows? German law requires the German companies to comply, so German companies require via contract or custom that South African companies must either comply or not get business. My understanding is that no South African company is subject to a foreign law. In other words, this is compliance because it makes commercial sense. Yeah, unfortunately, Louis had to step out at past, so he's not available to answer this. But from my understanding and also discussions with him and others, is that while South Africans are not necessarily needing to comply with the German regulations, it's the supply chain that where we then get asked and we are expected to do things. So we can opt not to do it, but that means that the German companies can then say that they can't choose us because we are not compliant. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation. And from that point of view, trying to get our ducks in a row, trying to understand what the implications are is really very important.
Grace, I can quickly step in here if you like to.
Yes, thank you, Katrina.
Hi. So yeah, I totally get that it's quite complicated to understand the German law, and we really don't need to put a lot of focus on that, because what is very, very important with regard to the law, the idea is never that a German company can put all the responsibility towards their suppliers. That is one of the most important things I would say that you have to know about the law. It is the case that big European tour operators who fall under the law can request their suppliers on site to help them, for example, with regard to the risk analysis. But it's not the case that a company should say, you don't do everything that is expected in the law, so we quit the relationship with you. That should always be the ultimate exit and is never a standard procedure. I think we went quite deep down the road of the German Supply Chain Act. And just for if you are interested in that whole concept, I would like to share a training review that we as a roundtable together with many important players of the industry, such as Dare Tour and also Booking and so on, have created. It is an incredible pilot project that has not been seen in any other industry. And that e-learning that is freely available explains all of these details of the law, because it is really, really important for me to that you understand, as the comment also said, it's not about imposing a foreign law to another country. It's just that European tour operators might have all of these legal requirements that they might follow, which brings them into closer contact with their local suppliers. Which also might, local suppliers bring into a position where they have to share certain data with the company, but it's not okay, we have this obligation, so we just forward it to you as South African suppliers. That is quite critical. So yeah, thanks to Yara for posting the link into the chat. So I hope that this might also help you to understand it, even if you're not too interested in the law itself. It also gives you a pretty good overview of the topics that we discussed today. So it's intended for tourism companies, it's intended for front staff, for guides, for drivers, so for everybody who works on the ground within the tourism value chain. To get more perspectives and insights about the whole topic of human rights and tourism.
Thank you so much for adding in on that as well. So looking at almost wrapping up on this side, and I just want to sort of pull the last things together if there are no more questions. Katrina, can I do a quick just a share from my side? I just want to also remind everybody that as part of this initiative, and with funding from the Roundtable on Human Rights in Tourism, we've also been able to create this digital hub with educational resources. So this is where you can also go and you can find a lot of information on different topics. And these are all available free of charge. It might link through to some that have got paid for as well, but all the information that we've got here is all free of charge. We also have various digital learning platforms that we've been pulling information from, so you can also dive straight into them and see what's happening. And then if you do go in on one of these, for example, you'll see that the way that we just share it is that there's a little photograph. It's a description on what it is. This one you can see down here is a webinar. It'll take about 45 minutes. And you can actually go through all of these or look at different categories and actually just go and see what they've got available. So there's a lot of information available here. And it just makes things so much easier if you can send staff to one place to actually go and look for what they're needing to do. So thank you very much to Katrina and her team, also just for their support in getting this off the ground. So wrapping up, I think in essence what Louis was also trying to say, and what I'm taking away here, is that contracts really are a crucial tool for managing risk and for managing relationships. And it needs to be very clearly stipulated. They are also key in ensuring just transition and fair working conditions. There are ways in which we can use that to actually implement that change. What I found also that Cheryl said is she looked at it and sort of saying that the way that they're working, it impacts on the staff and it impacts on the community in a positive way. They also have to put in a lot of effort around their energy and their business management. It hasn't been easy, but definitely the take home for me was that at the end of the day, the way that they deal with their staff, their community, their energy, their business management is done in such a way that it is a fair model that actually does last over the longer term, and that's got the long-term positive impact. So it's really great to see that example on the ground. Thanks for that, for sharing that, Cheryl. I think that's it from our side. I'd like to just give acknowledgement to Roundtable for Human Rights in Tourism. Special thanks to Katrina and Jana for the work that we've been doing together. I'd also just like to acknowledge Rachel Ngele. She was supposed to be here today and facilitate the session. Unfortunately, she landed in hospital with bronchitis and tonsillitis earlier this week, and she's still in hospital, so she was not able to do it, although she tried to convince her doctor she could. Unfortunately, that was not possible. So I was happy to jump in and to facilitate the session. So I hope that was all well received, and I'm also just very grateful for SATSA and Africa's Eden for their support in marketing this. and then to the whole team that's been working behind the scenes to make it all come together. Thank you very much for all of that.